consider new possible charges against a former city inspector with ties to Mayor Cantrell. Rob Masson has more.
Sources say federal prosecutors have linked former city inspector Randy Farrell to the federal probe into Mayor LaToya Cantrell. Those sources say Farrell may have influenced the mayor to fire Jennifer Cecil, the former deputy director of the City Safety and Permits Department, in August of 2019, leading to Cecil's ultimate departure from City Hall. Federal prosecutors are racing against the clock. This month marks 5 years since Farrell allegedly pressured Cantrell to fire Cecil. That 5-year mark, an important one for federal prosecution laws.
It appears as if there's a 5-year statute of limitations that is going to run out very soon, and I think that could impact when they're going to do something on him.
Farrell is no stranger to federal prosecutors. 3 years ago, he pleaded guilty to federal tax charges, admitting to concealing income from the IRS and preventing employment taxes from being deducted. Sources say he now faces more scrutiny from a federal grand jury looking into his business dealings with City Hall. But it's doubtful his previous charges will have any bearing on the Cantrell investigation.
Mayor Cantrell,
He's pled guilty to it. It's over, okay? So I don't think those types of things could come into play.
Randy Farrell has not only run afoul of federal laws, he also faces charges here in Jefferson Parish for alleged contract fraud and conspiracy involving a residential construction project in Metairie. A filing from May of this year accuses Farrell, former New Orleans Safety and Permits Inspector Larry Chan, and another man of contract fraud and conspiracy to file false statements involving this home on Butternut Avenue in Metairie. But in court filings, Farrell's attorney said Farrell did in fact conduct inspections on the home in spite of the charges and claims to have photographic evidence to back it up. It's not clear whether the Jefferson Parish charges will figure into the federal investigation into Cantrell, which so far has resulted in a single indictment against her former bodyguard, retired NOPD officer Jeffrey Vappy.
You're either a fool or a rookie if you start trying to assume why grand juries or even regular pettit juries do what they do. Every case is different, every jury is different, every fact situation is different. We don't know till we know.
Now, Randy Farrell is also accused of forgery in the Jefferson Parish case. He pleaded not guilty at his arraignment in June. His attorney, Rick Simmons, declined comment and referred us to documents in the case which state his client did do the work he's accused of falsifying. We also reached out to the mayor's office for comment and were told they will reply when they can.